drop it. Now! The wheelchair creaked against the marble floor. An ebony cane pointed toward the shadows. I said, drop it. Now! Silence. Then shuffling footsteps. A thin boy emerged from the library darkness, torn clothes, something pressed against his chest. On the floor, the sound echoed through the empty church. 3 heavy objects hit the cold marble. The bishop leaned forward in his wheelchair, eyes narrowing. They weren't silver candlesticks. They weren't money from the collection box. They were books. Gray's Anatomy. His voice was ice. Medieval philosophy. Medical Latin. He raised his gaze to the boy, skeletal thin, reeking of the streets, hands trembling. A bitter laugh escaped. A thief who steals books. I was going to return them, sir. Silence. The bishop picked up the heaviest volume, his eyes gleaming with something cruel. I'm going to make you a proposition you'll never forget. Heavy pause. And thank God I'm not calling the police. He opened the book to a random page. So let's see, read this out loud in Latin. A contemptuous smile. Read it correctly and I'll pay for your medical school. It was 2:15 in the morning on a Sunday in December 1984 in Cedar Falls. On that frozen night, something happened that would destroy an entire community's certainties, something that would take 8 years to reveal its true meaning. My name is Harold Pemberton, and I have served the wealthy for 40 years. I was the butler to the Montgomery family, one of the oldest and richest families on the East Coast. For 3 decades, I watched their youngest son grow from a rebellious child into a man of the cloth, Bishop Matthew Montgomery. But this story, this extraordinary story, I didn't witness firsthand. It was told to me years later by Father Patrick O'Brien, a young assistant priest who was there that December night in 1984. He was the one who saw everything, who heard everything, and who carried the weight of that secret for nearly a decade before finally sharing it with me one rainy afternoon in 1993, when the truth could no longer be contained. What I'm about to tell you happened in a small town called Cedar Falls, population 12,000, nestled in the hills of rural Pennsylvania. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are currency, and where judgment flows as freely as communion wine. The Montgomery family owned half the county, timber mills and coal mines that had enriched them for 4 generations. But young Matthew Montgomery had walked away from all of it. At 25, he entered seminary. At 32, he was ordained a priest. At 38, paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident that should have killed him, he became the youngest bishop the diocese had ever appointed. What the people of Cedar Falls didn't know, what nobody knew except the Montgomery family and their most trusted servants, was that Bishop Matthew Montgomery was not poor. Catholic bishops take vows of poverty, yes. They renounce worldly possessions, yes. But technically, legally, Matthew hadn't inherited the family fortune. His father still controlled it. And his father, the cunning industrialist Thomas Montgomery, had created something extraordinary. A private charitable foundation invisible to the public eye that funneled millions of dollars into scholarships, medical care, and education for the poorest communities in America. The bishop was merely the foundation's anonymous administrator. For 6 years, Bishop Matthew had secretly paid for the education of 43 students, farm workers' children, factory workers' daughters, kids from the trailer parks and the government housing projects. Not one of them knew who their benefactor was. They received anonymous letters, cashier's checks, scholarships from foundations with bland names that revealed nothing. Medical school, law school, engineering programs. The bishop had a particular obsession with medicine. Father Patrick told me why years later. Matthew's younger sister, Catherine, had died of leukemia when she was 9 years old and Matthew was 12. She died because the small-town hospital didn't have the right equipment, didn't have the right specialists. By the time they got her to Philadelphia, it was too late. Matthew never forgot watching his sister fade away while doctors stood helpless. When he became a priest, he made himself a private vow. He would create doctors, as many as he possibly could. But that December night in 1984, Matthew was tired, frustrated, angry even. Of the 43 students he'd funded, only 11 had actually graduated. The rest had dropped out, partied away their opportunities, or simply lacked the discipline to finish what they'd started. He was beginning to believe that money couldn't fix broken people, that poverty wasn't just about lack of resources, it was about lack of character. He had become, without realizing it, cynical, which is perhaps why what happened that night hit him so hard. Cedar Falls in December was brutal, the kind of cold that hurt your lungs when you breathed, the kind of cold that killed. The church, St. Augustine's Parish, was one of the few buildings in town that stayed unlocked at night. Matthew insisted on it. A church should be a sanctuary, he said, always open. Father Patrick, younger and more cautious, worried about theft, about vandalism. Matthew ignored him. God's house doesn't have locks, he would say. For 3 weeks, small items had been disappearing from the church library. Nothing valuable, old books mostly, religious texts, philosophy, but also, strangely, medical journals, anatomy textbooks, anything related to science or medicine. The sacristan noticed first, then Father Patrick. They mentioned it to the bishop, who brushed it off. Probably some college kid doing research, he said. But then Father Patrick started noticing something else. Food from the parish kitchen was disappearing. Bread, cheese, cans of soup, and one of the wool blankets from the storage closet. Someone wasn't just visiting the church. Someone was living in it. That Sunday, Father Patrick stayed late after evening mass, hidden in the sacristy, waiting. The bishop found him there around midnight. "What are you doing, Patrick?" the young priest explained. The bishop listened, his face unreadable. Then he said 6 words that changed everything. "Get my wheelchair, we're going hunting." They waited in the darkness for over 2 hours. The bishop in his wheelchair near the library entrance, Father Patrick concealed behind a column 20 feet away. The church was absolutely silent, except for the ticking of the old clock near the altar and the wind howling outside. Then around 2 in the morning they heard it, the soft creak of a side door opening. Footsteps, careful and quiet, moving through the nave toward the library. Father Patrick's heart hammered in his chest. The bishop sat perfectly still, fingers wrapped around his ebony cane, face carved from stone. The footsteps grew closer. Then they heard the sound of books being pulled from shelves, pages turning. The bishop waited, counted to 30. Then rolled his wheelchair forward with a sudden violent push, the wheels loud against the marble. "Drop it! Now!" And that's when the scene I described earlier unfolded. The boy emerging from the shadows, the books hitting the floor, the bishop's cruel laugh when he saw what had been stolen. Not silver, not money, books. But Father Patrick saw something the bishop initially missed. He saw the boy's face, saw the intelligence in those eyes, sharp and quick despite the hunger and exhaustion, saw the way the boy looked at those books like they were treasure, like they were everything. This wasn't some random thief. This was someone desperate for knowledge. The boy was maybe 18, maybe younger. Hollow cheeks, skin stretched tight over bones. His clothes were layered, 3 shirts and 2 jackets, all of them threadbare and filthy. His hands, when he'd held the books, were covered in cuts and old scars. Father Patrick recognized the signs. This kid was homeless, had probably been homeless for a long time. Anatomy grey. The bishop's voice was pure contempt. Medieval philosophy, medical Latin. He picked up the Gray's Anatomy textbook, a massive tome that must have weighed 10 pounds. "This is a first-year medical school text. Do you even understand what you're looking at?" The boy said nothing, just stared at the floor, shoulders hunched. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." The boy raised his head slowly. His eyes met the bishop's, and Father Patrick saw something flash between them. Defiance? Recognition? Fear? He couldn't tell. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. Then quietly, "Thomas, sir." "Thomas what?" "Just Thomas." The bishop studied him for a long moment. "Where do you live, Thomas?" Silence. "I asked you a question." "Nowhere, sir." "Anywhere." Wherever I can." The bishop's expression didn't change, but Father Patrick saw his grip tighten on the cane. "You're homeless." "Yes, sir." "Family?" The boy's jaw clenched. "Don't have one, sir." "Everyone has family, boy." "Not me. Not anymore." The words were flat, dead. "They left me at a gas station when I was 14, drove away and never came back." Father Patrick felt his chest tighten. 4 years. This child had survived alone on the streets for 4 years. The bishop was unmoved. "So you decided to become a thief?" "I'm not a thief, sir." The boy's voice was quiet but firm. "I borrow, I read, I return." "You broke into a church." "The door was unlocked. You said churches should be open." The bishop's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't quote my own words back to me, boy." "Sorry, sir." The bishop looked down at the books again. "Why these? Why medical texts?" The boy swallowed hard. "Because I want to understand." "Understand what?" "How the body works, how to fix it when it breaks, how to help people who are sick." A bitter laugh from the bishop. "You want to be a doctor?" "Yes, sir." "You, a homeless thief with no family, no education, probably can't even afford a hot meal, and you want to be a doctor?" The words dripped with mockery. "Do you have any idea how absurd that sounds?" The boy's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, sir, I know exactly how absurd it sounds." "Then why bother? Why waste your time dreaming about something that will never happen?" For the first time, emotion cracked through the boy's composure. "Because somebody has to help people like me, sir. Somebody has to care about the ones nobody else cares about. And if nobody else will do it, then I will." The silence that followed was absolute. Father Patrick held his breath. The bishop stared at the boy, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then the bishop did something that Father Patrick would never forget. He reached down, picked up the Latin medical text, and opened it to a random page. His face transformed into something cold and cruel. "I'm going to make you a proposition you'll never forget." Heavy pause. "And thank God I'm not calling the police." The boy's eyes widened. "So let's see. Read this, out loud, in Latin." The bishop's smile was pure contempt. "Read it correctly, and I'll pay for your medical school." Father Patrick almost gasped out loud. It was impossible. The passage the bishop had chosen was advanced Latin, medical terminology mixed with classical grammar. Even Patrick, who had studied Latin for 6 years in seminary, would have struggled with it. The boy stared at the page. His lips moved silently. "Well?" The bishop's voice was mocking. "Cat got your tongue? Or perhaps you realize now that stealing books doesn't actually make you educated." The boy's hands trembled as he held the book. Father Patrick felt a wave of pity. This was cruelty. Pure cruelty. The bishop was going to humiliate this child, prove to him that his dreams were worthless, and then probably have him arrested anyway. But then the boy opened his mouth, and he began to read. Nervus vagus, also known as the 10th cranial nerve, extends from the medulla oblongata through the jugular foramen, descending through the neck and thorax into the abdomen. His pronunciation was rough, his accent American rather than classical, but the words were correct. It innervates the muscles of the pharynx and larynx, providing motor function for swallowing and phonation, while its sensory branches supply the mucous membranes of the pharynx, larynx, and portions of the external ear. He paused, looked up at the bishop. The bishop's face had gone completely white. His mouth hung slightly open. Father Patrick felt goosebumps rise on his arms. The boy had done it. Impossibly, incredibly, he had done it. The boy continued, his voice growing stronger. Furthermore, the vagus nerve plays a crucial role in parasympathetic regulation, modulating heart rate, stimulating digestive secretions, and controlling smooth muscle contractions throughout the gastrointestinal tract. He closed the book gently. The passage goes on to describe the anatomical variations in vagal nerve pathways, but the main point is that it's the longest cranial nerve and essential for autonomic function. The silence in the church was deafening. The bishop stared at the boy as if seeing a ghost. His hands, still gripping the arms of his wheelchair, were shaking. "How?" The word came out as barely a whisper. How do you know this? The boy shrugged, suddenly looking very young and very tired. I read, sir. I've been reading everything I can find for 4 years. The public library before they kicked me out for sleeping there. Textbooks I find in dumpsters behind the college. And when I found out this church had a medical library, I started coming here at night. I never damaged anything. I never stole anything permanently. I just wanted to learn. But that's... The bishop struggled for words. That's graduate-level anatomy. That's not something you just pick up from casual reading. It is if you read it 20 times, sir. If you have nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, no TV to watch, no friends to talk to. If books are the only thing standing between you and losing your mind completely, the boy's voice cracked slightly. Reading is all I have. Father Patrick saw tears forming in the bishop's eyes, though the man's face remained hard. But you didn't just memorize it. You understood it. You explained the function. Yes, sir. Why? Because understanding is the point, sir. Anyone can memorize words. But to actually help someone, to actually heal someone, you have to understand how things work. You have to know why. The boy looked directly at the bishop. Like your legs, sir? The bishop stiffened. Excuse me? Your paralysis. It's not from the accident itself, is it? I've watched you move sometimes when you don't think anyone's looking. Your toes flex. Your knees respond to stimulus. That's not complete spinal transection. The boy took a step closer, his fear seemingly forgotten. My guess would be incomplete spinal cord injury with significant inflammation and possibly some kind of compression. In 1984, they probably told you nothing could be done. But that's not entirely true. There are experimental treatments, surgical interventions that could potentially restore some function. You just need someone who understands the pathology. Father Patrick's jaw dropped. The boy had just diagnosed the bishop from observation alone. And from the look on Matthew's face, he was right. The bishop's voice came out strangled. How could you possibly know that? Because I pay attention, sir. Because I care. Because this is all I think about, all I dream about. The boy's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down his dirty face. I know I'm nobody. I know I'm just some homeless kid who steals books and sleeps in churches. But I swear to God, sir, if you give me a chance, if you actually pay for medical school like you just said, I will work harder than anyone else. I will learn everything, and I will help people. I will help people like me, who nobody else sees. I will help people like you who everyone's given up on. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then the bishop did something Father Patrick never expected. He started to laugh, but it wasn't a cruel laugh this time. It was something else, something broken and amazed and utterly overwhelmed. What's your full name, son? The bishop's voice had completely changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like wonder. Thomas William Harper, sir. Thomas William Harper. The bishop rolled the name around like he was tasting it. And you're 18 years old. 17, sir. I'll be 18 in March. The bishop nodded slowly, as if making some internal decision. Then he looked up at Father Patrick's hiding spot. Patrick, stop lurking in the shadows and come here. Father Patrick emerged, face burning with embarrassment at being discovered. The bishop gestured at the young priest. Father Patrick O'Brien, meet Thomas Harper. Thomas, Father Patrick is going to take you to the rectory kitchen and get you some food. Real food, not whatever scraps you've been surviving on. Then he's going to give you one of the guest rooms for the night. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a very long conversation about your future. The boy's eyes went wide. Sir, I don't understand. The bishop held up one hand. You read that passage in Latin. I made you a promise. I'm going to keep it. His face hardened slightly. But understand something, Thomas. Medical school is 8 years minimum. 4 years of undergraduate pre-med. 4 years of medical school itself. It's going to cost roughly $150,000, maybe more. It's going to require discipline, sacrifice, and more hard work than you've ever imagined. If I invest that money in you, I expect results. I expect excellence. I expect you to prove that you're worth it. Can you do that? The boy was crying openly now, his whole body shaking. "Yes, sir, I promise, sir, I won't let you down." "Good." The bishop's voice softened slightly. "Now go eat something before you collapse. Father Patrick will take care of you." And as Father Patrick led the stunned boy away toward the kitchen, he glanced back at the bishop. Matthew sat alone in his wheelchair in the middle of the empty church, staring at the medical textbook that still lay open on the floor. In the candlelight, Father Patrick could see tears streaming down the bishop's face. But what happened next, what unfolded over the following weeks and months, would prove even more extraordinary than that impossible night. Because the bishop wasn't just offering charity, he was about to wage a war with his own community, his own church, and his own doubts. And Thomas Harper, the homeless boy who read Latin in the darkness, was about to discover that getting into medical school was only the beginning of his impossible journey. The next morning, Cedar Falls woke up to rumors. By afternoon, those rumors had become wildfire. Someone had seen Father Patrick leading a homeless boy into the rectory late at night. Someone else had heard raised voices in the bishop's office. By evening mass, the speculation had reached fever pitch. Had there been a break-in? Was the bishop in danger? Why was a street kid being allowed to stay in the parish house? The bishop refused to explain. When concerned parishioners asked, he simply said he was helping someone in need and that it was none of their business. This naturally made everyone more curious and more suspicious. Thomas stayed in the guest room for 3 days. Father Patrick brought him food, clean clothes, and most importantly, privacy. The boy was terrified, convinced at any moment that someone would tell him it had all been a mistake, a cruel joke, and throw him back onto the streets. On the morning of the 4th day, the bishop summoned him to his private office. The office was lined with books, floor to ceiling, thousands of them. Thomas stood in the doorway, eyes wide, drinking in the sight like a man dying of thirst. "You like books?" The bishop's tone was neutral, unreadable. "Yes, sir. So do I." The bishop gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Thomas. We need to talk." The boy sat, perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee. The bishop studied him for a long moment. "I've been making phone calls. A lot of phone calls. I've spoken to the admissions office at Penn State. I've spoken to pre-med advisors. I've spoken to people who know a great deal more about this process than I do." He leaned back in his wheelchair. "Here's the situation. You never finished high school." "No, sir. I only made it through 9th grade before my parents left." "That's a problem. You can't get into college without a high school diploma or equivalent." Thomas's face fell. "Then this was all for nothing." "I didn't say that." The bishop pulled out a folder. "You're going to take the GED exam. That's the General Education Development Test. If you pass, it's legally equivalent to a high school diploma. The test covers mathematics, science, social studies, language arts, and writing." He paused. "It's designed for adults who never finished high school. Most people study for months. You have 6 weeks. 6 weeks? The bishop's eyes were hard. "You told me you'd work harder than anyone. Prove it." "I'm going to arrange for a tutor, someone from the local community college. You're going to study 8 hours a day, every day. Father Patrick will provide your meals and lodging. At the end of 6 weeks, you take the test. If you pass, we move forward. If you fail, you get one more chance. Fail twice, and this ends. Understood?" Thomas's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Understood, sir. I won't fail. We'll see." The bishop's expression softened fractionally. "I should tell you something, Thomas. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if you have what it takes. I want to believe you do. That's why I'm doing this. But I've been disappointed before. Many times. I won't disappoint you, sir." The bishop looked away, out the window at the frozen town beyond. That's what they all say. Over the next 6 weeks, Thomas Harper studied with an intensity that Father Patrick had never witnessed. The tutor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Eleanor Brennan, arrived every morning at 7. She worked with Thomas until noon, then left him with assignments that he'd work on until dinner. After dinner, he'd study until midnight, sometimes later. Father Patrick would find him asleep at the desk, head pillowed on textbooks, pencil still in hand. Mrs. Brennan was impressed, then amazed, then slightly frightened. "This boy isn't just smart," she told the bishop after 2 weeks. "He's extraordinary. His retention is perfect. His comprehension is graduate level in some subjects. Where has he been hiding?" "The streets, apparently," the bishop replied dryly. But there were problems. Thomas struggled with mathematics beyond basic algebra. He'd never had proper instruction in geometry or trigonometry. Mrs. Brennan spent extra hours trying to cram years of missed education into his head. Some nights Thomas would break down in frustration, crying that he was too stupid, too behind, that he'd never catch up. Father Patrick would find him those nights, sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by crumpled papers and broken pencils. The young priest didn't say much. He'd just sit next to the boy until the crying stopped. "You're not giving up," Patrick would say quietly. "You're too close. I can't do the math." Thomas's voice was raw. "I can read Latin medical texts, but I can't solve a simple equation. I'm broken." "You're not broken. You're just learning. There's a difference." "What if I fail? What if I let him down?" Father Patrick thought about the bishop, about the way Matthew's face had looked that night in the church when Thomas read the Latin passage, about the tears Patrick had seen. "Then you try again. That's all any of us can do." The day of the GED exam arrived in late January. Thomas was pale, hands shaking as Father Patrick drove him to the testing center in the neighboring town. The bishop didn't come. "Too much attention," he said. But Patrick knew the truth. Matthew was terrified that he'd bet on the wrong person, terrified that his hope would be crushed again. The test took 6 hours. Thomas emerged looking shell-shocked. Patrick tried to ask how it went, but the boy just shook his head. "Can't think about it. Won't know for 3 weeks anyway." Those 3 weeks were agony. Thomas tried to keep studying, but his concentration was shot. He'd stare at pages without seeing them. Father Patrick caught him one night, standing in the church library, running his fingers over the spines of the medical textbooks he'd once stolen in the darkness. The boy looked like he was saying goodbye. The results arrived on a Tuesday in mid-February. Father Patrick was the one who opened the mailbox at the rectory and saw the official envelope. His hands shook as he carried it to the bishop's office. Matthew stared at the envelope for a full minute, without touching it. "Do you want me to open it?" Patrick asked softly. "No." The bishop picked it up, turned it over in his hands. "If he failed, this is over. I can't keep doing this, Patrick. I can't keep hoping just to be disappointed. What if he passed?" The bishop's laugh was bitter. "Then God has a sense of humor I don't understand." He opened the envelope, pulled out the single sheet of paper, read it once, twice, then closed his eyes. Father Patrick's heart sank. He failed. "No." The bishop's voice was strange. "He passed. Top 10% in language arts, top 5% in science. He struggled with math as expected, but he passed every section. He passed, Patrick." Patrick felt tears spring to his eyes. "Dear God." The bishop opened his eyes, and Patrick saw something he'd never seen before. The man looked terrified. "Now the real work begins, and I have no idea if he's ready for what's coming." Because neither of them knew yet what was coming. Neither of them knew about the town's reaction, about the gossip that would turn into accusations, about the people who would try to destroy Thomas before he even got started. Neither of them knew that Cedar Falls, that small town that prided itself on Christian values and community, was about to reveal just how ugly it could be when faced with something that challenged its comfortable assumptions about who deserved success and who didn't. And neither of them knew that 8 years from that moment, on a spring morning in 1992, everything would come full circle in a way that no one, not even the bishop himself, could have imagined. But that Tuesday, in February 1985, they only knew one thing. Against all odds, a homeless boy who stole books had passed his first test, and the impossible journey had truly begun. Thomas Harper's acceptance to Penn State came through in March of 1985. Full scholarship, pre-med track, starting that fall. The bishop had arranged everything through his anonymous foundation, routing the money through 3 different charitable organizations to ensure no one could trace it back to the Montgomery family. On paper, Thomas was just another lucky recipient of the Appalachian Educational Trust, a foundation that helped underprivileged students from rural communities. But secrets have a way of leaking, especially in small towns. It started with Mrs. Eleanor Brennan, the tutor. She didn't mean any harm. She was proud of her student, proud of what he'd accomplished in such a short time. At a church social over coffee and cookies, she mentioned to a friend that she'd been tutoring a homeless boy who was going to medical school. "Isn't that wonderful?" she said. "The bishop is helping him." By the next Sunday, the story had mutated. The bishop was spending church money on some vagrant. The bishop had moved a homeless delinquent into the rectory. The bishop was playing favorites, wasting resources that should go to actual parishioners. At first, the bishop ignored it. Gossip was inevitable, he told Father Patrick. Let them talk. But the gossip got worse. Someone claimed they'd seen Thomas stealing from the church that night. Someone else said he was probably on drugs. A third person wondered aloud why the bishop was so interested in helping this particular boy. The insinuation was vile, and Father Patrick wanted to confront them, but the bishop held him back. "Defending ourselves only makes it worse," Matthew said. "Let time prove them wrong." But time didn't cooperate. As spring turned to summer, Thomas remained in Cedar Falls, working odd jobs to save money for books and supplies, still living in the rectory's guest room. His presence became a constant irritant to certain members of the congregation, particularly to a man named Robert Hutchins. Robert Hutchins was everything Thomas wasn't: wealthy, successful, respected. He owned the largest hardware store in 3 counties and sat on the church council. He had 2 sons, both of whom had graduated from respectable state schools and now worked in the family business. He was also the loudest voice complaining about Thomas. At a church council meeting in July, Hutchins finally said what others had been whispering. "Bishop, I mean no disrespect, but this situation with the homeless boy has gone on long enough. People are uncomfortable. They're asking questions." The bishop, seated at the head of the table in his wheelchair, regarded Hutchins with cold eyes. "What questions, Robert?" "Well, for one, where is the money coming from? Medical school isn't cheap. If you're using church funds—" "I'm not using church funds." The bishop's voice was ice. "This is entirely private charity." "From whom?" "That's confidential." Hutchins leaned forward. "Bishop, you can't expect us to just accept that. You've moved a vagrant into church property. You're sending him to an expensive university. People have a right to know what's going on. People have a right to mind their own business." The room went silent. Hutchins's face flushed red. "With all due respect, Bishop, it is our business when it affects this parish's reputation, when it affects our standing in the community." The bishop's knuckles went white on the arms of his wheelchair. "And what exactly is affecting your standing, Robert? The fact that I'm helping a young man get an education? The fact that I'm giving someone a chance who deserves it?" "How do we know he deserves it?" Hutchins shot back. "What do we really know about this boy, where he came from, what he's done? For all we know, he could be dangerous." "He's not dangerous, he's brilliant, and he's going to be a doctor." "So you say." Hutchins crossed his arms. "But I've been asking around, Bishop. People at the community college say Mrs. Brennan told them this boy only made it through 9th grade. 9th grade, and you're sending him to medical school? That's not charity. That's delusion." Father Patrick, sitting in the corner, saw the bishop's hands start to tremble. Matthew was gripping the wheelchair so hard his fingers were turning white. Patrick knew that look. The bishop was about to lose his temper, say something he'd regret. Before he could, the door opened. Thomas stood in the doorway, holding a tray with coffee for the council members. He'd been helping in the rectory kitchen, earning his keep. He froze when he saw the room full of hostile faces staring at him. The silence was suffocating. Thomas set the tray down carefully on the side table, keeping his eyes down. "Sorry to interrupt," he said quietly. "I'll just leave this here." "Wait." Hutchins's voice stopped him. "Come here, boy." Thomas hesitated, then approached. "Yes, sir." Hutchins looked him up and down like he was examining livestock. So you're the one causing all this fuss? I'm not trying to cause any fuss, sir. No? Hutchins's smile was cruel. You're just a homeless kid who thinks he can become a doctor. Is that it? Thomas's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. I don't think it, sir. I know it. Oh, you know it. Hutchins laughed. Tell me, boy, my son Robert Jr. graduated from Penn State with a 3.8 GPA. He had every advantage, every opportunity, and he decided business was a better fit than medicine because medical school was too hard, too competitive, too demanding. He glanced around the room. But you, a kid who lived on the streets, who barely has a high school equivalency, you think you're going to succeed where people like my son knew better than to try? Thomas's voice came out soft but firm. Maybe your son didn't want it badly enough, sir. The room erupted. Hutchins shot to his feet. How dare you? How dare you speak about my son like that? The bishop's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. That's enough, Robert. Sit down. I will not sit down. This is exactly what I've been talking about. This boy is arrogant, disrespectful. No, Robert. The bishop's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. This boy has more courage and intelligence in his little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. And if you can't see that, if all you can see is his poverty and his circumstances, then maybe you should examine why that is. Hutchins's face went purple. Are you questioning my character, Bishop? I'm questioning your judgment and your compassion. How dare you? I've been a member of this parish for 30 years. I've donated thousands of dollars. I've served on every committee, every council, and you're going to take the side of some nobody, some vagrant who showed up a few months ago? The bishop met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Robert, I am. Hutchins grabbed his coat. Then you can count me out. I'm done with this parish, done with this hypocrisy. He stormed toward the door, then turned back. And mark my words, Bishop. When this boy fails, when he crashes and burns like I know he will, don't expect any sympathy from me. Don't expect any of us to forget that you threw away everything this church stands for on a gamble that anyone with sense could see was worthless. He slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. In the silence that followed, Thomas stood perfectly still, face pale, hands trembling at his sides. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that about his son. I've ruined everything. No, the bishop's voice was firm. You told the truth. That's never wrong. But he's leaving the church. Others will follow. You're losing everything because of me. The bishop looked at the other council members, all of them avoiding his gaze. Perhaps I'm not losing anything. Perhaps I'm just finally seeing what was always there. He turned his wheelchair toward Thomas. Go to your room, pack your things. Tomorrow, Father Patrick is driving you to State College to get you settled. The bishop's gamble split the congregation down the middle. Some families left St. Augustine's, following Robert Hutchins to a larger church in the next town. Others stayed, quietly supportive but unwilling to speak up publicly. A handful, led by Mrs. Brennan and a few older widows, became fiercely protective of Thomas, glaring at anyone who dared speak ill of him. Thomas left for Penn State in August of 1985. Father Patrick drove him 5 hours through the Pennsylvania mountains, the boy silent the entire way, staring out the window like he was memorizing the landscape. At the campus, they unloaded his single suitcase, his one box of books, and stood awkwardly in the parking lot. I don't know how to thank you, Thomas said finally. The bishop, you, Mrs. Brennan, I don't have words. Then don't use words. Father Patrick put a hand on his shoulder. Use actions. Prove everyone right who believed in you. Prove everyone wrong who didn't. And if I fail, Father Patrick smiled sadly, then you fail. But you fail trying, which is more than most people ever do. Over the next 4 years, Thomas sent letters to Father Patrick, sometimes to the bishop. They were detailed, almost obsessive. He wrote about his classes, his grades, his struggles. Freshman year was brutal. He was behind in nearly everything, spending 20 hours in the library for every 1 hour his classmates spent. He failed his first chemistry exam, nearly failed physics, but he clawed his way back, earning B's when A's seemed impossible, fighting for every percentage point. The bishop never wrote back. Father Patrick thought that was cruel until he saw Matthew one night, sitting alone in his office, reading Thomas's latest letter over and over again, tears streaming down his face. "He's doing it," Matthew whispered. "Against everything, he's actually doing it." Sophomore year was better. Thomas made the dean's list. Junior year, he scored in the 95th percentile on his MCAT, the medical school entrance exam. Senior year, he applied to 10 medical schools. He was rejected by 9. The 10th, the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, offered him conditional acceptance. They'd take him, but only if he completed a post-baccalaureate program first, essentially a 5th year of undergraduate pre-med courses to prove he could handle the rigor. Thomas didn't hesitate. He wrote back, accepting immediately. In Cedar Falls, the bishop received the news in silence. Father Patrick expected him to be disappointed, but instead, Matthew seemed relieved. "He needs this," the bishop said. "He needs to prove to himself that he can overcome rejection, that he can keep going anyway." The 5th year was lonely. Most of Thomas's friends had graduated, moved on. He lived in a tiny apartment, worked nights at a hospital cleaning floors to pay for food, studied until dawn. Father Patrick visited him once and was shocked by how thin he'd become, how exhausted. "This is too much," Patrick said. "You're killing yourself." Thomas shook his head. "No, I'm building myself. There's a difference." In the spring of 1990, Thomas Harper was officially accepted to the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. He was 22 years old. It had been 5 years since that night in the church. The bishop threw a small celebration dinner at the rectory. Just Thomas, Father Patrick, Mrs. Brennan, and a few of the parishioners who'd stuck by them. Matthew raised a glass of wine, his hand shaking. "To Thomas, for proving that grace and grit can overcome anything." But Thomas didn't celebrate. He was already thinking ahead, already worried. Medical school was 4 more years. 4 more years of being poor, of being exhausted, of wondering if he was good enough. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question gnawed at him. What about the bishop? What about the man who'd given him everything? Because Father Patrick had told him, finally, part of the truth. The money wasn't coming from some anonymous foundation. It was coming from the bishop's family, from the bishop himself. Matthew Montgomery, the man everyone thought lived on a priest's modest salary, was secretly wealthy beyond imagining, and he'd spent nearly $250,000 on Thomas Harper's education. "Why?" Thomas had asked Father Patrick. "Why would he do that for me?" Patrick thought about Catherine Montgomery, the little girl who died because small-town doctors couldn't save her. About Matthew's obsession with creating physicians. About the 43 other students who'd failed or quit or wasted their opportunities, but he couldn't betray the bishop's confidence completely. "Because he sees something in you," Patrick said simply. "Something worth saving." Medical school was even harder than Thomas had imagined. The first 2 years were pure academics, drowning in biochemistry and pathology and pharmacology. Thomas studied 18 hours a day, survived on 4 hours of sleep, lost 30 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. But he didn't quit. He couldn't. Not after everything. 3rd year was clinical rotations. This was when medical students finally got to work with real patients, learning from residents and attending physicians. Thomas rotated through surgery, internal medicine, pediatrics, obstetrics. He was good at all of them. But when he did his neurology rotation, something clicked. The brain, the spinal cord, the intricate dance of neurons and synapses that controlled everything human beings were. Thomas became obsessed. He read every neurology textbook he could find. He volunteered for extra shifts in the neurology clinic. He watched spinal surgeries from the observation gallery until his legs ached from standing. One of the neurology attendings, Dr. Samuel Chen, noticed. "You're good at this," he told Thomas one day. Have you thought about neurosurgery? Thomas almost laughed. Neurosurgery was the most competitive specialty in medicine. Only the best of the best even got interviews. Kids from Harvard and Yale and Stanford, not kids who used to be homeless. I don't think that's realistic for me, sir. Dr. Chen studied him with sharp eyes. Why not? Because I'm not... He struggled for words. I'm not the kind of person who becomes a neurosurgeon. What kind of person is that? Thomas couldn't answer. You're smart enough. Your grades prove it. You work harder than anyone I've seen. Your hand-eye coordination is excellent. Dr. Chen leaned back in his chair. The only thing holding you back is your own doubt. So I'll ask again. Why not? That night, Thomas called Father Patrick. It was the first time he'd called in months. Patrick, still at St. Augustine's, was surprised to hear his voice. Thomas, is everything all right? I need to ask you something. Thomas's voice was strange. The bishop, his paralysis. Is it true what I said that night, that it might be treatable? Father Patrick hesitated. Why are you asking? Because I'm thinking about neurosurgery, and I keep thinking about him, about whether I could actually help him. Thomas, the bishop is 52 years old. He's been in that wheelchair for 14 years. Every doctor he's seen has told him. I know what they told him. Thomas interrupted. But medicine changes. What was impossible in 1978 might not be impossible now. I've been reading journals, Patrick. There are new techniques for spinal cord injuries, new approaches. It's not hopeless. Father Patrick felt his chest tighten. What are you saying? I'm saying that if I become a neurosurgeon, if I get good enough, maybe I can give him back what he gave me. Maybe I can help him walk again. The silence on the line stretched out for a long moment. Then Father Patrick said quietly, He never told you why he's doing this, did he? Why he's helped you? Thomas shook his head, even though Patrick couldn't see it. No. His sister died when he was 12. Catherine. She had leukemia, and the local doctors couldn't save her. Matthew blamed himself for not being able to help, even though he was just a child. He became a priest, partly to serve God, but partly to find another way to save people. He's been funding medical students for years, Thomas. Dozens of them. Hoping one of them would become the kind of doctor who saves people like Catherine. Thomas felt tears burning his eyes. And they all failed him. Dropped out, changed careers, didn't have the discipline. Until you. You're the only one who made it, Thomas. The only one. Then I owe him everything. You owe him success. That's all he wants. For you to become the doctor you're meant to be. Thomas wiped his eyes. I'm going to do neurosurgery, Patrick. I'm going to apply for residencies. And somehow, some way, I'm going to find a way to help him. Yes, 4th year of medical school was application season. Thomas applied to 20 neurosurgery residency programs, knowing the odds were brutal. Hundreds of applicants for maybe 5 spots per program. He got 3 interviews. He was rejected by 2. The third was at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, one of the best neurosurgery programs in the country. The interview was terrifying. A panel of 5 neurosurgeons grilled him for an hour, asking about his background, his motivations, his understanding of the specialty's demands. One of them, Dr. Rachel Morrison, asked the question that Thomas had been dreading. You're from a very non-traditional background. You started college at 20. You were homeless as a teenager. What makes you think you can handle the pressure of neurosurgery? Thomas took a deep breath. Because pressure is all I've ever known, ma'am. Most people get into medicine because they want to help people. That's true for me, too. But I also got into medicine because it's the only path I've ever had. It's the only thing between me and the streets. That's not pressure. That's survival. And I know how to survive. Dr. Morrison's expression didn't change. That's not reassuring. Surgeons need to be calm under pressure, not desperate. I'm not desperate anymore. Thomas met her gaze steadily. I was desperate when I was stealing books from a church to teach myself anatomy. I was desperate when I was failing chemistry freshman year. But I'm not desperate now. Now I'm prepared. Now I'm ready. And I will work harder, focus more, and dedicate myself more completely than anyone else you interview. Not because I'm afraid of failing, but because I know what failure looks like, and I refuse to go back to it. The room was silent for a moment. Then one of the other surgeons, an older man named Dr. Harold Brennan, leaned forward. Any relation to Eleanor Brennan from Cedar Falls? Thomas blinked in surprise. Yes, sir. She was my tutor. She's the one who helped me pass my GED. Dr. Brennan smiled. She's my aunt. She wrote me a letter about you last year, told me if you ever applied here I should pay attention. He looked at his colleagues. Eleanor Brennan doesn't hand out compliments lightly. If she says this young man is worth our time, I'm inclined to believe her. Thomas got the call 3 weeks later. He'd been accepted. 5 years of neurosurgery residency, starting July 1992. He was 24 years old. It had been 7 years since that December night in the church. Father Patrick drove to Pittsburgh to deliver the news in person to the bishop. Matthew was in the church garden, wrapped in blankets despite the spring warmth, staring at the flowers like he didn't really see them. He'd aged dramatically in the past few years. His hair was completely grey now, his face lined and weary. He got the residency, Patrick said without preamble. Pittsburgh, neurosurgery. The bishop closed his eyes. Neurosurgery. God help him. It's what he wants. It's suicide. Do you know the failure rate for neurosurgery residency? Nearly 40% don't finish. They burn out, break down, quit. Matthew's hands clenched on the armrests of his wheelchair. He's come so far. What if this destroys him? Or what if it makes him exactly what he's meant to be? The bishop laughed bitterly. You sound like me 7 years ago, so full of hope. You were right to hope. Was I? Matthew's voice was haunted. Sometimes I wonder if I did him any favors, Patrick, if I just raised him up to fail harder. If I took a boy who could have had a simple, happy life and turned him into someone who'll never be satisfied, never be at peace. Father Patrick knelt beside the wheelchair. He's going to make it, Matthew. I know he is. The bishop didn't answer, just stared at the flowers and wondered what he'd set in motion all those years ago. Neurosurgery residency was hell. That was the only word for it. Thomas worked 100-hour weeks, 36-hour shifts, sleeping in on-call rooms when he slept at all. He assisted in brain tumor removals, aneurysm clippings, spinal decompressions. He held human brains in his hands. He watched people die on the operating table, despite everyone's best efforts. He saw miracles and tragedies in equal measure, and slowly, impossibly, he became good at it. By his 3rd year, he was the resident the attendings requested specifically. By his 4th year, he was doing parts of surgeries himself, under supervision. By his 5th year, he was publishing research papers and getting offers for fellowship training. But he hadn't forgotten. Through all of it, through all the exhaustion and stress and moments of doubt, he hadn't forgotten the man in the wheelchair who'd given him everything. In his rare free hours, Thomas researched spinal cord injuries obsessively. He read every paper, every case study. He learned that incomplete spinal cord injuries, the kind where some nerve function remained, were sometimes treatable with surgery if the injury was from compression or inflammation rather than complete transection. He learned about new surgical techniques, new approaches that didn't exist in 1978 when the bishop had his accident, and he started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was possible. In December 1996, Thomas Harper completed his neurosurgery residency. He was 29 years old. He'd been offered fellowships at 3 major medical centers, prestigious positions that would have taken him to Boston or San Francisco or Seattle. He turned them all down. Instead, he accepted a position as an attending neurosurgeon at a small hospital in western Pennsylvania, 40 minutes from Cedar Falls. Father Patrick was the first to figure out why. When Thomas called to tell him about the job, Patrick said quietly, You're coming back for him, aren't you? I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You're coming back to help the bishop. Thomas was silent for a long moment. I need to see his medical records first. I need to know if it's even possible. But yes, if there's any chance at all, I have to try. Thomas, he's 58 now. It's been 18 years since the accident. Even if the injury is theoretically treatable, the odds of success after this long, I know the odds. Thomas's voice was firm. I've always known the odds, and I've always beaten them. In January 1997, Thomas Harper returned to Cedar Falls for the first time in 7 years. The town had changed. New stores, new houses, but St. Augustine's Church looked exactly the same. He found Father Patrick in the rectory. The priest was older now, greyer, but his smile was warm as he embraced Thomas. Look at you, a real doctor. Thomas laughed. Barely. I still feel like I'm pretending. Where's the bishop? Patrick's smile faded. In his office. He doesn't leave it much anymore. Thomas, you should know he's not well. He's given up, I think. Given up on a lot of things. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Can I see him? Patrick hesitated. He doesn't know you're coming. Might be a shock. Good. Thomas managed to smile. I owe him at least one shock, after all the ones he gave me. The bishop's office was dark, curtains drawn. Matthew sat in his wheelchair facing the window, silhouetted against the faint light. He didn't turn when Thomas entered. Father Patrick, I told you I don't want dinner. Just leave me alone. It's not Father Patrick, sir. Thomas's voice was soft. It's Thomas Harper. The wheelchair spun around so fast it nearly tipped. The bishop's face was a mask of shock. Thomas? His voice was barely a whisper. Is that really you? Yes, sir, it's really me. They stared at each other across the dim office. Then the bishop's face crumpled, and Thomas saw tears streaming down the old man's cheeks. You made it. You actually made it. Thomas crossed the room, knelt beside the wheelchair. Because of you. All because of you. I didn't do anything. I just gave you money. No, sir. Thomas's own eyes were wet now. You gave me a chance. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe I could be more than what everyone said I was. You saved my life. The bishop reached out with a shaking hand, touched Thomas's face like he couldn't believe he was real. Neurosurgery. Patrick told me. I still can't believe it. Believe it. And believe this. Thomas took a deep breath. I want to see your medical records. All of them. From the accident, from every doctor you've seen since. I want to examine you, run new tests, because I think maybe there's a chance I can help you. The bishop froze. What? Your paralysis. It might be treatable. I don't know for certain, but I need to check. Will you let me? Thomas, it's been 18 years. Every specialist in the country has looked at my case. They said what they believed in 1978. Medical knowledge changes. Surgical techniques improve. What was impossible then might not be impossible now. He gripped the bishop's hand. You gave me everything. Let me try to give you something back, please. The bishop stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, Dr. Harper. Do your worst. Over the next 6 weeks, Thomas studied the bishop's case with the same obsessive intensity he'd once studied stolen medical textbooks by candlelight. He reviewed old X-rays, MRI scans, surgical notes from the emergency operation done right after the accident. He examined the bishop personally, testing sensation, reflexes, muscle response. And slowly, a picture emerged. The original injury had been a burst fracture of the T12 vertebra with bone fragments compressing the spinal cord. The emergency surgery in 1978 had stabilized the spine but hadn't fully decompressed the cord, partly because the surgical techniques available then were cruder, partly because the surgeon had been conservative, afraid to do more harm. Over the following 18 years, scar tissue had formed around the compressed area, creating additional pressure. The result was an incomplete spinal cord injury with some preserved nerve function, but not enough to allow walking. But incomplete meant not hopeless. Thomas brought his findings to Dr. Chen, his old neurology mentor, who was now chief of neurosurgery at Pittsburgh. He laid out the case, his proposed surgical approach, the risks and potential benefits. Dr. Chen listened carefully, then sat back with a troubled expression. "Thomas, this is extremely risky. The patient is 58. The injury is 18 years old. The scar tissue alone makes this surgery 10 times more dangerous than a fresh injury. You could make him worse. You could kill him." "I know. And you want to do it anyway?" Thomas met his mentor's gaze. "He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I became a doctor. If I can't help him, then what was the point of any of it?" Dr. Chen sighed. "You're emotionally involved. That's dangerous for a surgeon." "I've been emotionally involved since I was 17 years old." Thomas's voice was quiet. "This isn't about emotion. It's about debt, and it's about doing what's right." The surgery was scheduled for May 1997. Thomas explained everything to the bishop beforehand, holding nothing back. The chances of success were maybe 30%. The chances of complications were high. The chances of making things worse were real. The bishop listened to it all, then said simply, "Do it." "Why?" Thomas had to ask. "After all this time, why take the risk?" "Because you're the one asking." The bishop's smile was sad. "Because if I can't trust the boy I saved, who can I trust?" The surgery took 14 hours. Thomas, assisted by Dr. Chen and 2 other neurosurgeons, carefully removed the scar tissue, decompressed the spinal cord, and stabilized the spine with modern titanium hardware. It was delicate work, millimeters, meaning the difference between success and permanent paralysis. Thomas's hands never shook, his focus never wavered. He thought about that December night 12 years ago, about the boy who'd read Latin in the darkness, about the cruel test and the impossible challenge, and the man who'd believed anyway. When it was over, when the last suture was placed and the bishop was wheeled to recovery, Thomas collapsed in the surgeon's lounge and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. The bishop woke up 36 hours later. Thomas was there sitting beside the bed, looking like death himself from exhaustion. Matthew's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearing. Did it work? His voice was rough from the breathing tube. Thomas reached down, gently pressed on the bishop's right foot. "Do you feel that?" The bishop's eyes went wide. Yes, I feel it." "And this?" Thomas touched the left foot. "Yes. Oh, God. Yes." Over the next 6 weeks, with intensive physical therapy, the bishop regained strength, first in his toes, then his feet, then his legs. The progress was slow, frustratingly slow, but it was progress. 3 months after the surgery, he took his first steps with a walker. 6 months later, he walked unassisted across his office. 9 months later, on a Sunday morning in February 1998, Bishop Matthew Montgomery walked down the center aisle of St. Augustine's Church to deliver Mass, without his wheelchair, without his cane, on his own 2 feet. The congregation erupted in tears and applause. It was a miracle, they said, an act of God. But Father Patrick knew better. He looked at Thomas Harper, sitting quietly in the back pew, and saw the truth. It wasn't a miracle. It was medicine. It was skill. It was a debt repaid by someone who'd never forgotten where he came from. After Mass, the bishop found Thomas in the church library, the same library where it had all started. They stood among the medical textbooks, the philosophy texts, the Latin treatises. "I owe you my life," Matthew said quietly. Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. I owed you mine first. Now we're even." The bishop laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. "We'll never be even, Thomas. What you've given me—" The bishop gestured at his legs, at his body that could move again. "This is beyond price." "Then we'll both just have to keep trying to outdo each other." Thomas smiled. "Because I'm not done yet, sir. I want to open a clinic, here in Cedar Falls, for people who can't afford specialists, people like I used to be." The bishop's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to stay. Someone has to take care of this town. And I figure I owe it something. It gave me a church to steal books from after all. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then the bishop said softly, "There's something I need to tell you about the others, the 43 students I funded before you. I know about them. Father Patrick told me." "No, you don't know everything." The bishop's voice grew heavy. "I gave up on most of them, wrote them off when they struggled, didn't fight for them the way I fought for you. I thought they were weak, thought they didn't deserve more chances." He looked away. "But maybe I was the weak one. Maybe they needed someone to believe in them past their first failure, the way I believed in you." Thomas thought about that first chemistry exam he'd failed, about the 9 medical schools that rejected him, about all the times he'd wanted to quit but couldn't because too many people believed in him. "You believed in me because I read Latin," he said quietly. "But what if I hadn't been able to? What if I'd failed that test? Would you have given up on me too?" The bishop's silence was answer enough. "Then maybe the lesson isn't just about me succeeding." Thomas met his gaze. "Maybe it's about learning that everyone deserves the same chance I got. Everyone deserves someone who won't give up on them, even when they fail, especially when they fail." The bishop nodded slowly. "You're right, and wiser than I am." He extended his hand, the hand that could grip again, that could feel again. "Thank you, Dr. Harper, for everything." Thomas shook it. "Thank you, Bishop Montgomery, for seeing something in a homeless thief that no one else saw." The story spread. Not all of it, not the private details, but enough. The town learned that the bishop had secretly funded Thomas's education. They learned that Thomas had come back to Cedar Falls, turned down prestigious positions elsewhere to help the man who'd saved him. They learned about the surgery, the recovery, the miracle that was really medicine and dedication and love. Robert Hutchins, the man who'd left the church in protest 12 years earlier, came back. He found Thomas outside the clinic that was being built, stood awkwardly for a moment, then said, "I was wrong about you." Thomas could have been petty, could have rubbed his success in the man's face. Instead, he just nodded. "Thank you for saying that, sir." "My son," Hutchins continued, "Robert Jr., he's been struggling, depression, anxiety, can't hold a job. I thought he was just weak, thought he just needed to try harder." He looked at Thomas with something like desperation. "But maybe he needs what you had. Maybe he needs someone to believe in him even when he's failing." Thomas thought about the bishop's confession, about the 43 students who'd been abandoned when they struggled, about second chances and third chances, and the kind of grace that doesn't quit. "Bring him to see me. Let's talk about what he needs. Not judgment, help." Hutchins's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not." Thomas's smile was gentle. "But you're getting it anyway. That's how grace works." The clinic opened in the spring of 1999. It wasn't fancy, just a small building with basic equipment, funded partly by Thomas's salary and partly by an anonymous donation that everyone knew came from the Montgomery Family Foundation. Thomas worked there 3 days a week, seeing patients who couldn't afford specialists, doing pro bono surgeries when he could, training young residents who wanted to learn from the doctor who'd gone from homeless to neurosurgeon. And on Sunday mornings, he attended Mass at St. Augustine's, sitting in the same back pew he'd once hidden in as a terrified teenager, listening to Bishop Matthew Montgomery preach about redemption and second chances and the God who sees potential in broken things. Years later, Father Patrick asked Thomas if he'd ever regretted his choice to stay in Cedar Falls instead of pursuing the prestigious career he could have had elsewhere. They were sitting in the rectory garden watching the bishop, now 65 and healthy, tend his flowers with steady hands. "No." Thomas's answer was immediate. "Everything I am, everything I have, came from this place, from that night in the church. How could I regret staying?" "But you could have been famous. One of the top neurosurgeons in the country." "I am one of the top neurosurgeons in the country." Thomas's smile was quiet. "I just happen to practice in a small town and help people who need it most. That's enough for me." The bishop walked over, wiping dirt from his hands. "Are you two gossiping about me?" "Always," Thomas said with a grin. "We were just saying how much better looking you are since you got out of that wheelchair." "Careful, Doctor." The bishop's eyes twinkled. "I can still make you read Latin as punishment." They laughed together. Three men whose lives had intertwined in impossible ways, bound by a moment of grace in the darkness, by a cruel test that became a blessing, by the understanding that sometimes the people society throws away are the ones most worth saving. In the end, that's what I learned from Father Patrick's story, from the tale of Bishop Matthew Montgomery and Thomas Harper, and a December night in 1984 when everything changed. I learned that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in lives transformed. That power isn't about control, but about lifting others up. That faith means believing in people even when they can't believe in themselves. The bishop destroyed everyone, yes. He destroyed their certainty that homeless kids couldn't succeed. He destroyed their comfortable assumptions about who deserved help and who didn't. He destroyed their judgments, their prejudices, their carefully constructed walls between the worthy and the unworthy. And in doing so, he saved not just one boy, but an entire community that learned to see with new eyes. Thomas Harper practices medicine in Cedar Falls to this day. He's 51 years old now, still taking care of the forgotten and the overlooked, still remembering what it felt like to be invisible. Still reading, still learning, still grateful for the man who pointed a cane at him in the darkness and said, "Prove yourself." And Bishop Matthew Montgomery, retired now at 82, still walks the halls of St. Augustine's Church, still tends his garden, still tells anyone who'll listen about the homeless boy who read Latin and changed his life. If this story moved you, I need to ask you something. In the comments below, tell me, have you ever witnessed someone being written off, being judged, being deemed unworthy? Or have you been that person yourself? Have you found the courage to see past society's labels? Your story matters. Share it with us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who needs to be reminded that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, that circumstances don't define destiny, that one person's belief can change everything, share this video with them. Sometimes the stories that change us are the ones we pass along. Until next time, remember this. True wealth isn't measured in what we own, but in what we give away. True power isn't about control, but about lifting others up. And true faith means believing in people even when they can't believe in themselves, especially then.